caseworkers, therapists even have been involved in this. So we have to keep tabs on pretty much every aspect of our clients' lives. When these things happen to them, when they come in contact with these systems, it immediately puts them in jeopardy of many other possible criminal charges or investigations by child welfare. So just because we have a criminal client at one point does not mean at all that that client will not also become a victim of the child welfare system. And vice versa, when we have a new show cause hearing, which is what happens directly after a child has been removed from a home, that immediately could put that client in danger of a criminal charge that could pop up as late as 8 months or even longer after the initial removal of the child. So a lot of what we are trying to do is identify all the areas person, literally because a mother does not have a proper bed for a case and for someone to file criminal charges against this woman for child neglect. And we see this happen all the time. So our job is to identify like what resources do we have, if we do at all, to prevent these charges from being filed, right? And what ways can we identify all the areas of our clients' lives to prevent further harm? A lot of what we do, I feel like, is kind of like a harm reduction model. So yeah, there's a lot to this practice. And I would also just like to say, while we're at it, as Aisha brought up, ideally we're a holistic practice model, but this work does not look the same for me and Brittany. The things that, and I mean, we're occupying the same job positions, right? But when we come to work in the morning, we are in constant flow of whatever is happening in our clients' lives. Whatever may work out for me during a family group conference may not work out for Brittany. This comes down to our individual skill set as well as what our individual clients are experiencing, which is a range of experiences, especially in the case whenever DHS, the Department of Human Services, is involved in our clients' lives. They are literally just the life police. They just get to tell you like who you sleep with, literally, who you date, who you bring into your home, what kind of appliances and objects you have in your home, the way you maintain yourself, the way you maintain your home. So these factors are all variant, is what I want to say. And it's very much in flow. So I imagine whatever questions that you guys might have for us, we may answer them differently and we may give you experiences that sound different. But ultimately, it's not so much the tactical steps that we are taking as much as what kind of ways that we are being creative when we are responding to whatever situations are popping up for our clients. So I just want to say thank you to you guys for listening to all this. It's nice to be able to talk to you.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you, just even for that, for my students and the people who are watching, because something that was really important when thinking about even opening up dialogue to have this conversation. And when I was talking to Brittany about people who she knew and like how, we could have really meaningful dialogue about this topic, that it's important representationally for who's leading these conversations, who's kind of talking to our students, something that's very traditional in high school debate, as well as college debate, and all these students can attest, is that it very much so operates purely at the legal level and never kind of taking into context interpersonal. We're never kind of having discussions that relate to the people who are actually affected and how, we replicate systems of power and how we even speak and how, we understand the topic as competition. I'm going to say this argument, you're going to say this argument, boom, whoever wins. We've had a productive conversation about immigration reform. We've had a productive conversation about, in this instance, criminal justice reform. And I fear that is definitely going to be the case for this topic, even with everything, and that's sad when we have to even with everything that is happening right now, it's in your face. So now you should care that these conversations are led by people who don't want to attempt to have those kind of very careful conversations, and with people who deal with, things beyond just like the text. So I just want to say thank you to y'all for taking some time out of your day, your busy schedules, to speak to our students and those who are watching, because I really, really, really appreciate it. And it's something that I think is needed in conversations about this topic. So yes, thank you. This is beyond. But I do want to kind of move into the different areas of the topic. And as y'all said, you're going to have different responses to this. And so it is, the big criminal justice reform. And even there, maybe I just made a mistake because there has been this, and Brittany brought this up to me, that criminal justice might not be the proper phrase for how this system is understood. Maybe some explanation for why criminal justice is not correct, and rather it's criminal legal, why that distinction is a thing. And then if you want to kind of move into sentence hand on Zoom, or to send me the I'll go first moment, because that's, oh, perfect. Boom, see, that's me talking about, let me just give you an actual hand. Yes, boom. Okay.
Okay, so I want to tackle this because I want to frame how I think might be helpful to think about the three topics as subtopics of criminal reforms to the criminal legal system. The reason that I would submit the answer to why not to say criminal justice reform is going to be different depending on who you talk to, but the core of it is that there's not any justice in the criminal legal system. And so until there is justice in a criminal legal system, you are just talking about a concept, and the concept is actually what you're striving for. So you can't name a thing that it isn't, right? It's like me saying I'm Beyonce. I can say I'm Beyonce all day, but we know I'm not. So I can just call myself Beyonce and that be the end of it, right? So in the same way, you can't mislabel what the system actually is. And I think that framing it differently allows folks to think about more critically. When we say justice, what do we mean? What is a fully functioning just system, and what does that look like? What are the tenets of that? As you're navigating through these topics, at least the three that you've mentioned, I think about policing as the entry into the legal system as a form of entry. It's not the only form of entry, but it is a major form of entry as it relates to criminal cases and criminal interactions, right? Forensic science being a failed process of the legal system, and it being a component that touches not only the criminal legal system, but also you have faulty forensic science in juvenile court. You have faulty forensic science in all types of cases, but you see it heavily within the criminal legal system. So I think of sort of the number two being forensic science because it is an example of a process that has failed. And because of that failure, it also makes the accomplishment or the acknowledgement of justice even more attenuated. Sentencing is how you come out of the legal system, right? And so I think if you can think about it in the pathway of how do people enter, what happens to them, or how are they harmed during with forensic uses or misuses of forensic science being an issue of how people are harmed while they're in the systems, and ultimately how does that impact their exit from the system, because sentencing is a much larger concept around what do we need as a society for people to experience in order for us to feel like the system was just and that there was a just result. So I think if you're going to frame the lenses, it's helpful for me to think about it in that order. And obviously it's a cycle though. It's not the end, because when sentencing has different formats, and policing affects whether you're resentenced, policing affects whether you enter the system again. And so I think that pathway is really critical. But when you are making and forming arguments around each of those components in each of those chapters, the first question I think you have to ask is, what is it that whatever position you're taking, what is a truly just system, right? And so how is that structured? What are the tenets of that? What are the core values of a just system? What does that look, feel, smell like for the people who are navigating that system? And that has to color how you craft arguments about what the reform is, right? This is 3 of thousands of reforms that need to happen to the legal systems. But these are really critical ones that have so many like sub points under them.
I appreciate that. Brittany? Okay.
That was really, I like the way you strung that together, that pathway. That was really helpful for me too, to just think about. I agree with what Aisha said about just in general, the reasons why we don't necessarily call it criminal justice and instead refer it to the criminal legal system. It's very important to name things as they are, because that creates room for us to imagine alternate realities, a reality in which we do have a criminal justice system that currently is not the status quo and is largely agreed upon by several players. And you can see that, we see that firsthand by the differencing in the way certain clients are treated, but also just the way how arbitrary things are. I would say, like Oklahoma, a lot of the logic both by judges and by DAs and by DHS workers is emotional. You walk into a room and the DHS workers are all PTA looking white women, all crying, all upset, all very, very, I mean, they're overly eager almost always to help in clients' lives that are Black or women of color, but rarely the same for white women or white mothers. And a lot of our clients are white women, which is something I did want to touch on earlier rather than later. And so that plays a role also, because the violence we see is not just to Black and Native women and women of color, but also to poor white women and just white women in general of this region. But I think that the way I would to kind of go into two things with sentencing, one, to piggyback a little bit off of the pathway that Aisha has kind of set up for y'all, is the way I think about, and this is something I took from debate, how violence and oppression works or physically manifests is in 3 different realms. And this is not to say that metaphysical violence that we talk about, like the metaphysical stuff that happens in debate, also I think manifests on these 3 tiers, which is institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And I think that what Aisha said can be broken down a little bit into that as well, where we see sort of institutionally, there needs to be a lot of reform to the criminal justice system or criminal legal system, if you will, and the police institutions and the courts and prisons, etc. But a lot of what we see and a lot of the problems we face here in Tulsa specifically occurs because of interpersonal bias that members of these institutions utilize. So I in the past year really had to sit with the fact that I'm seeing the faces behind the system, the faces behind the institution. And they are people I go to the grocery store with. They are people that I went to school with. They are part of the larger community I find myself living in. So when it's it's no longer just, the criminal legal system. It's no longer the criminal justice system we're talking about. I can see the faces and I understand that that person has a choice, because the law is vague in a lot of instances. A lot of times, judges, DAs, DHS workers can use their discretion to be helpful. They could use their discretion and the vagueness of the law to come up with creative solutions that would meet people where they're at and actually, ensure that kids are getting home, communities are staying together, and that people are being rehabilitated and we're actually solving these problems. That's not what's happening usually. Oftentimes they use their discretion to be more punitive. And how that plays out in terms of sentencing, which I think people really think about like in you get 5-year like plea deals, is it kind of blows a lot of things up, because when we talk about sentencing, not only did what Aisha said, is that really kind of the pathway to creating the cycle that leads you to getting arrested in the first place, but I think that sentencing level really operates and can talk to the internalized form of violence that we end up leaving with. A lot of our clients, their entire, they've gone through a year's worth where their psyche has been beaten down. Their self-worth has been beaten down. They've been isolated from their community. They've been isolated from their job, right? So that internalized level of just inner policing, self-worth, all of that really plays a role to where you no longer necessarily have to police people in the same way. You have family members calling DHS workers on each other. You have people reporting even though they've been through the systems themselves because of the various things they picked up and internalized during their own process. Additionally, on sentencing, the second thing I want to talk about is for family cases, people aren't getting sentences, right? For a lot of the cases, like sentencing is interesting as a concept because Sydney brought this up. We can have a client who has a criminal case and if or was picked up, let's say it's a DV, domestic violence, and their baby father or the person who was violent to them, the DA wants to get them for other charges, drug charges, gang charges, whatever, and they want her to testify. She does not want to testify. They will strategically bring up child welfare charges as a way to not like literally coerce people, but as a way to say, if you don't do this, we're going to do this. And vice versa, right? You have people who, if they're doing well in their FTP case or their family case, the criminal charges can be brought up. And that I think is more because of just the statute of limitations for a variety of things, which mean, and there's various, so in family cases, the way that things are stipulated is, you'll stipulate to things like, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing because it's important, like improper caregiver, abusing your child. There's lingo. There's specific phrases. Can you type it, Sydney? Can you type it in the chat? There's specific phrases, and there's some forms where it's like you are stipulating or agreeing, conceding you abused your child, either kind of the way second degree, first degree, third degree murder works. And then there's a specific one that if you stipulate to, you leave yourself open to criminal charges. You leave yourself, that happens a lot. We also in this state are punitive to victims of domestic violence. We will not only charge people or create failure to protect your children from witnessing you be violated is what we do. We have a lot of clients who the only thing they have to work is going to domestic violence services, and in an area where just like there's domestic violence plays a huge role in women's lives here in Oklahoma. It plays a huge role in just the communities. And the way that our state views domestic violence as though it's like a conscious choice people are making to stay in relationships or be abused or have their children witness abuse, or that the alternative to that is to take the children away from their mother, it's pretty bad. And so when people think about sentencing, I want like specifically to state for our clients, even in criminal court, it's not a really question of time because you're fighting for your kids. You're either going to, when you get the case, come out with your kids in your custody or you're not. It really puts into question the idea of choice or plea deals, because there are forms of plea deals that people can do, whether that is keeping their head down, biting their tongue, whether that is working their services. And a lot of services are going to domestic violence services or going to mental health services that don't help our clients. They don't meet our clients where they're at. They're not geared or created to help our clients. They're geared to surveil our clients. They get to see the awful things that their therapist says about them when they come to court. And then they have to go back to that therapist and pretend and engage and like find a balance with, how can I make this person think I'm engaged enough, but not actually reveal anything to them? Because if I do, they're going to use it against me. And that is just a fact of the criminal legal system here, is that almost everything is used against our clients. And this is additionally a way to tear up communities. If you have a DHS investigation here, I'm not sure if this is true for everywhere else in the country, but you can no longer be a safety monitor. You can no longer be a foster parent. It doesn't matter if that was case or if it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So what that means is you have whole communities here who have 50 cousins. They know who their grandmother is, but they can't use their family as foster parents. They can't use their family as safety monitors. They can't put their kids in kinship placements because their community has been destroyed, because so-and-so has a criminal history or so-and-so has a DHS case back from 1999. And so kids are being placed all over Oklahoma. Kids are being placed not in kinship households. Kids are being placed Black kids are being placed in white households who don't know how to do their hair. So instead of our clients being able to actually spend family time, we have moms that are spending an hour a week doing their kids' hair. And then we have to, all of these things, right? What I just talked about is how we really come into play, finding resources. Because if your kid is placed in Oklahoma City, which is an hour and 30 minutes away from Tulsa and happens frequently, you have to figure out, our clients have to figure out how to get from Tulsa to Oklahoma City weekly, how to present to DHS, this overarching organization, to the state, to the DA, that they are good parents when their kids aren't in their care and they have all these obstacles. And it's just a lot that they have to deal with. So I think that that's a good way to think about, just in terms of debate, in a debate context, because I know you all are thinking about this in that, taking what Aisha said about the path that forensic science, policing, and sentencing really follows, and adding that to understand that not only are we talking about institutional forms of oppression, but also interpersonal and internalized. So even if, we're passing bills to reform, how is that going to stop the way we individually police people, and the DAs individually police our clients, is something that I think is really important to always remember.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of give just some concrete examples of some stuff that's happened in cases that I've been on when talking about sentencing and when talking about kind of the inner cogs of this system, right? That are never as nearly as black and white as they think. And like the following, case info that I'll share with you, like it'll be anonymous, but I wanted to share these as you were talking, Brittany. I was thinking of these examples because these were some that had shocked me initially. And I'm not saying that this is like the worst thing, right? Because we see a lot of really like fucked up shit come through this office. It's bad. And I want to bring these up as kind of just a way to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about. I had a client who was a young Mexican woman who had actually just graduated from a nursing school, who was seeking to get a job in healthcare. And she was pulled over with a brother in her car. And I'm not totally sure what exactly happened, but basically what ended up happening is the brother was the one got arrested for some reason, even though he wasn't the driver. My client was the driver. And they told her that she was free to go, but they were going to take her keys and impound her car. The police did. And my client said, no, I'm not going to give you my keys. I'm not under arrest. You can't take my car. And so they end up arresting her. They allege that she resisted arrest. She alleges that the police referred to her with racial slurs during the arrest. Ultimately, they find that she had one Xanax on her, which is like a schedule. I'm not even going to pretend like I know what it is. I'm not an attorney. But so she gets in trouble for this, and they're misdemeanor charges. And she and her attorney and I got together to kind of talk about the ways that we can deal with this case, because my client felt very upset about the way that things had gone. She felt like the nature of her arrest was unjust, and we agreed with her. Her attorney told her the different pathways of what could happen if she were to file a motion in the court to contest the nature of her arrest as unlawful, and thus anything that they found on her after the arrest should be suppressed, i.e. the Xanax, which is a big deal, because if this woman were to get this charge on her record, even though she had just graduated nursing school, it would be completely impossible for her to pursue a job in the healthcare industry. All that schooling that she had just completed would be completely moot at that point. And this client does struggle with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. And something that I did in the work is try to hook her up with mental health resources. And we were thinking we could try to get someone to prescribe her Xanax so it would be less of an issue. And it's not something that was possible. So that's like a form of mitigation work we might engage in. What ended up happening is her attorney files this motion. They have a motions hearing. to contest the nature of her arrest, to contest the fact that the officer never had a right to impound her car. The judge rules against my client's motion, and the DA refiled this charge that was initially misdemeanor charges for. I think they dropped the resisting arrest, but it was the mostly just the drug charge as a felony. They refiled what would have been a misdemeanor as a felony, and that was simply because my client chose to exercise her rights and chose to fight for her rights and contest the nature of this arrest. And so the whole thing completely restarts, right? Because the DA wanted to punish my client. There is no other reason why the DA would have wanted to refile what was initially a misdemeanor to be, an elevated felony charge, other than to just essentially torment her, is the way I feel about it. I think especially because that they had found out the information that she was interested in pursuing a career in the nursing or healthcare industry, that this happened as well. And so for those that might not know, I mean, whenever you, if you are convicted of a felony crime, this disenfranchises you in ways that won't just be putting her job in jeopardy. There goes her housing. There goes her ability to vote. There goes just in general the stigma that happens when somebody is a convicted felon, especially in the state of Oklahoma, and also just any other job prospect as she would have had outside of her industry. And so that was one way where I was like, that was one case where when it happened, I was very much like, okay, wow, like this is most definitely not like a black and white system. Like this is definitely not criminal justice. Like this is just pure, like, we're going to mess with these people. We're going to make things as hard as possible for them. And I very much would say on like a more conceptual level, I question to what extent you could reform this, right? What rules do you make to prevent that? Do you say that DAs aren't allowed to refile things as felonies? I don't really understand the insides of those cogs, right? I don't know what that reform would look like, but these are interpersonal reactions that we're talking, interactions like Brittany is talking about. These are people's feelings towards other people. Can you reform that? No, because we exist in the society that we live in that is hell-bent on punishing people unjustly. Jasmine, did you have something to say? Or
I had a question.
Yeah.
To that. So the decision for the DA to switch from a misdemeanor to a felony. Mm-hmm. 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. That makes some rational sense. Like, there's that's like, it makes sense. What is the logic, the rationale that is justified via this case even for that? Like to just be like, you know what, I'm going to switch it to, a felony instead of a misdemeanor. What is
it's just that is the thing. I mean, there is no, as far as I understand, when you're talking with the attorney when this happened, this was an arbitrary decision. I mean, I was like, why did this happen? Like, our client was literally fighting for her rights. Like, she's legally allowed to have a motions hearing to challenge her arrest. And she just said it's because he wanted to. I mean, literally, I feel like it's just the libidinal investment, right? It's the enjoyment of punishing people. There is no logic that I wish that I could give you that would be like, yeah, well, the DA is obligated. They have to under such rule. Like, no, the thing is that the DA didn't have to do that. The DA wanted to do it. And that's the kind of decisions that are being made that affect our clients the most.
I wanted to add something because that example was see stuff like that a lot where people are making decisions like that, and it is difficult for us as professionals to prep our clients for those realities. Yes, you could do that. So there's like a level of almost fear to fight or an incentive to just go with the flow, to just sit back and stipulate, take whatever plea deal they give whatever service plan you get. An ISP is individualized service plan. That's what our clients who get DHS cases, they are given a plan by DHS. Like, okay, we had an allegation you were taking drugs. So you're on your service plan. You need to go to drug tests on a color line every week, and then do a variety of things. So they'll make thing, or for whatever allegation or problem there is, they'll have a service our client's supposed to go to fix that problem within a 6 month to a year time span. So people are supposed to fix years long of substance abuse in a 6 month to year long time span for DHS. But I wanted to give an example of something that touches on the connection between how criminal court affects family cases, and piggyback kind of what off of Cindy was saying. I had a client of ours who their house was raided, and we have a lot of I don't know if it was a no-knock warrant or if they even had a warrant, but her house was raided. And the house is in her name, I believe. She has a storage unit also in her name. She's there in the home with the kids, and her husband is there as well. There's a lot of drugs in the house. In the storage unit with her name on it, there's also a lot of guns in the house. She says she didn't know it was there, that this is like news to her. Her husband, and what we all believed was a true heroic action and just really representing what a real one looks like, was like she had the consensus was she knew nothing. This is all on me. So he's taking the fall on the criminal charges end, and gets put in jail. He doesn't have a job, no money. They both don't really have money. So she's working the case. He actually got a chance to go to court. They both got a chance to go to court at first when their kids were first taken, because as a result of the raid, their kids were taken and put into DHS custody. So he's there at court. He has a court-appointed attorney because there is something that people have to sign called a pauper's affidavit, POPPER. And so he got a court-appointed attorney. In between that court date and the next family court date, he gets put in jail. He bonds himself out because he got a loan from a friend that he had to pay back. When he came back to court for family court for the child welfare case, he was told his attorney was no longer available to him because they found that him being able to bond himself out means he had assets, means he has money. So he has to go find his own attorney before the next court date to represent him, or else he'll be found in contempt of court or just breaking the rules of court. So this man was arrested without a job, already having come to this court, letting them know his financial situation, and they appointed him a free attorney because of his social conditions. Goes to jail, and to be clear, sorry I didn't add this part. When you're in jail, you still have to work services, even if you are expected to be taking classes, whatever classes are available to you. You're expected to work with your attorney to figure out and get information. So we have a lot of clients whose partners are in jail and will continuously go to court. And the judge is like, have they even been notified? Do we have confirmation they're the father? And the attorneys that represent them have not talked to them in months, usually have never gotten a hold with them. And in our state, if one parent's rights aren't terminated, both aren't terminated. So we're really racing, right? If our client's partner is in jail, we already know their rights, if that was the case alone and our client wasn't working services, would have been terminated with them in jail without them even knowing, potentially. So he was like, I need to get out so I can work the services. I need to get out so we can reunify, bring our kids home as a family. And it was a situation where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You either stay in jail, miss the court date, stipulate to a bunch of things that can have impacts on you further down the line, how you work, how you move in society, or get out, lose your attorney, still don't have any money. You now have to pay back your friend the bond and then come up with money to pay for an attorney. So this is the situations people find themselves in. And it's like, what do you do? And in that space, what do you do? Do you stay in jail, or do you find a way to get out knowing you're going to lose your attorney?
Good to ask. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. I'm on instruction here for Debate Boutique, and just kind of hearing about like the nuance of like all of these different cases and kind of the message of kind of the whole institution Still She Rises as like reflecting on like the holistic picture of kind of what's happening in a client's life makes me like think about the fact that in a lot of debate rounds, AFs that are talking about like, you know, changing the legal system or like, you know, even just tinkering with it or like broad level changes, don't talk about the people who are involved either outside the legal system or even the people involved with it as well. It's kind of a question that is seen as ridiculous because like you're like, why would you ever ask why these people would actually do it? Like there's a reason it doesn't actually exist. We should just like kind of exist in this utopian world in which we can kind of like in a vacuum compare whether this would be good or not. And I was wondering if you all had thoughts on like how that or how our students can problematize that and kind of point out like how that results in lack of nuance and understanding of how the whole system works.
Yeah, so here in Tulsa, there's been some pretty lackluster attempts at service dockets, dockets that are designed in criminal courts to address, you know, whatever issues. The dockets that I'm thinking of specifically here in Tulsa, we have special services docket, we have drug court, we have mental health court. We also have services such as women in recovery, as well as there's another one, female diversion. And there's a couple other dockets too that are designed to do this, where I believe the origins of these dockets are born out of attempts for reformation. I know that at least with special services docket, which I've worked on with clients several times, and what these are is the idea is to be sympathetic towards people with mental health problems, to be sympathetic towards people with drug issues, to be sympathetic towards people who are just in need of housing. I think it's an attempt to reduce the criminalization of homelessness, of poverty. But what we see is an entirely new set of a criminal system, right? These things have not reformed things for our clients. In fact, those of the clients that I have met on in drug court, for example, I have been in that courtroom when that docket is happening, and the overall vibe of it is extremely patronizing. It's extremely it takes the voice of the clients entirely. This docket isn't so much about rehabilitating people who are experiencing drug problems, but is rather a monthly check-in to shame them or give them literal applause and a literal goodie bag if they have not failed a UA. And immediately, once somebody has been placed in this docket, the way the Tulsa system treats it is that you've been given a gift. You're lucky that we're not going to prosecute you on a regular misdemeanor or felony docket. And so the moment that a client slips up, drops the ball, and what Brittany has described, like our clients are in these completely familial, cyclical, lifelong issues that have led them to become users, that have led them to develop these dependencies towards substances, that they expect that, you know, you should be grateful that you're in this program. You should be thankful that you're on this docket and not on the other one. And so the second that you slip up, it's a tactic of public humiliation, to be quite honest. I've seen it in person when you have to sit on sanction row. If you're being sanctioned, I have a colleague who's not here right now who attends all of the staffings, who has horror stories, quite frankly, where it's the judge and the DAs, and they just get together and basically engage what is shit talking the client if they have messed up in their eyes, whether that's a relapse or they didn't like the tone in which someone spoke to them. I mean, it's not designed to rehabilitate people, right? It's another way to maintain control over people. And like I said, it's a very patronizing system. The judges act like white saviors. They act like father figures. They act like people, the don't bite the hand that feeds you type mentality. And I can say for special services docket as well, it's a preferable docket, I would say, for my clients to be on than a traditional misdemeanor docket, because it requires like a monthly check-in with a service provider, be that like a a phone call or like dropping into an office or some texts, and then they show up once a month and the judge says, good job, keep up the good work, or you didn't do what you're supposed to do, and then you get again publicly chastised for it. So I think a lot of talk about reform, there is like a lot of well-meaning to it, right? The idea that we're taking steps to decriminalize homelessness, decriminalize and poverty. And maybe some circumstances, like, yeah, sometimes there's less people in jail as a result of these dockets, but it's not like it's improving the morality of the community. It's not like it's helping our clients. It's not like it's helping this community. It's a different form of punishment, rooted in humiliation, in my opinion.
Aisha, I asked to unmute you, I think. I can do it again. Just unmute.
Okay. So I think a way to frame or think about this, and I'm not sure if this actually gets to your question, Caitlin, but one thing I want to frame for folks in stepping back. The dockets that Sydney referenced are not reform. They are, when you think about the concept of, well, I guess it's for debate whether they are reform. This is what we're talking about. But there's an argument that they're not reform. And the question to that is, are the changes or the way that those dockets function or are structured an actual improvement towards, obtaining justice or seeking justice, right? And so if you are thinking about elements to implement, pieces of the puzzle to construct, to reform a system, I think you have to step back to sort of why does the legal system exist? So sort of you get to do, I'm going to try to give you like 60 seconds of criminal law 101, like first year criminal law in law school. It's either because you are looking towards rehabilitation, which is the system is not built for, but your argument is going to be, if you are trying to make the argument that of what reform looks like, a place you may want to start is rehabilitation, right? It's going to be built around incapacitation, meaning that you have decided who is worthy of being in society and who is not. And you can't reform a system or create this reform without wrestling with who are those folks and are there actually people that we are delineating aren't worthy of being a part of society, right? If you haven't done the analysis to figure that piece out, any type of structural implementation you put in place is going to be problematic, because what is it accomplishing? What value is it built on, right? You've got restitution, right? You've got the concept that someone has been harmed and they need to be made whole. They need to be paid back in order to be made whole. That is a sort of fundamental tenet of the structure of the legal system, right? And then you've got retribution, right? You've got this person needs to be punished so that there is a feel good, or there is the perceived victim feels better. When we are talking about what reforms need to happen, I think we have to analyze those aspects from the framework of who does this serve, right? Rehabilitation is arguably serves society as well as the person, right? Retribution, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily serve society as well as the person, right? And so we've got to figure out what are the things that we value. Does incapacitation serve society and the person? Does it actually serve society? You've got to do that analysis with each of these pieces that are already built in the legal system that we have been handed, right? And so when you are going through and making an argument of what to reform, it really does mean taking a step back of why do we do that way? Because I think oftentimes we summarize we summarize arguments, right? We say like, this isn't rehabilitative, right? It was never intended to be. That's not all that the system is built on. And so we're now beginning to have conversations about how do we make things grounded in rehabilitation. But the reality is that our legal system is much more grounded in those other three things: in incapacitation, retribution, and restitution. It's not grounded in rehabilitation. And so I think as a framework, how do you shift it from being grounded in those other three things to being grounded in rehabilitation? What are the things that need to be in place in order to do that? And I think Sydney said something that hit really on the head for me when she was telling that story about the prosecutor. There's culture and discretion that really impact how folks navigate through the system. And there's also culture outside of, these legal systems. There is, we all sort of have a responsibility in society. And there are a lot of folks that are just unaware of what goes on in the legal system, whether that's not to blame anyone, but that is a part of our culture that if it's not happening to us, then we don't have to know about it. And so that allows for this system to perpetuate. It allows for things to happen that persistently harm folks for generations and centuries, right? And so when we think about what does reform look like, it's not just about like all the actors in the system. It's what is society's role? What is our role beyond just our jobs? What is our role in making the system just, right? And I think we've got to think about the components of the players for sure. But we also have to think about the components of society, like what responsibility do we have as members of society to educate ourselves and to set the rules, right? How do we engage with that? Where are the spaces and places that we need to be? And I think those are the questions that when you're crafting arguments, you should be asking yourselves, because I think it'll give you a better framework for how to make more creative arguments, and also to how to loosen up from like, well, this is what we have. And so I got to work within this framework. And it's like, no, you don't, but you got to figure out why you're doing what you're doing and what values it ties to.
Ooh, amen. Brittany, I think your last comment, then I'm going to open up the stage to the questions that the students and folks have been asking, because it's quite, they have many. So yeah, Brittany.
I'll try to be quick. So I think the last thing Aisha talked about how do we play a role, or how do folks in the systems play a role, is really important for a place like Tulsa, where in the past couple of years we've seen large developments happen outside of any type of attempts to reform the criminal legal system here. What that means is we've had a huge park go up, a gathering place. And what that did was take an area where usually I've heard from people who live in this area, there was historically homeless people would camp out by the Arkansas River because it's usually dry and just not a nice river or like tourist attraction. And so in trying to make Tulsa nice, they have restricted who can live and who can set up camps in that area. And that was a big way where people were able to keep track of each other, because that's special services docket, which is every single month. And you're supposed to show up. You're supposed to continuously talk to your service provider. And it's mostly homeless people who are part of this program, which means they don't have access to phones, which means like the idea of checking in, coming to a place every single time and making something monthly, it's very difficult to do when you don't know where you're going to be. You don't know where you live. You don't know if you're going to be able to call anyone. But so I remember hearing someone in special services docket, like a name being called, and then being like, oh, they're probably out by the river. They haven't been doing well this past month. We think they have dementia. Just saying all the things, the way that people are able to keep track of each other and know each other just by having created that community. That community is being fractured actively by the development and gentrification, by the building of new family spaces for richer people to come and enjoy time with. And that's a big deal. Because a lot of the workers we see, the people who actually show up, again, like I said, the faces behind the systems, they like to detach themselves a lot from issues. They like to detach themselves and think that they are being as objective as possible, but their subjectiveness is there even when it's people on clients' teams. And I think that's apparent by I had one client who was like I said earlier, if a parent is working services and their one of rights aren't terminated, both rights will be kept intact. So our client was really in a place where she knew that they were always going to work against her and that they would probably terminate her rights on her own. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but DHS and DAs actively tell people they need to separate. Like they will actively tell people you cannot be with your loved one. We will never give your kids back if you don't leave this man, which is very hard for folks to do when they don't have access to money, when they don't have access to community, and when this is someone they've known since high school. And so her child's father is a Black man, a tall Black man with dreads. He works 12-hour shifts every single day and is now finding himself in a position where he needs to single father and show up, or else his kids are going to be taken away from both him and his partner. I remember outside of court, the DHS worker saying, I just don't think that he's engaged enough. I just don't think he wants this. This is 6 months to, no. This had to be 8 months into them working this case. This man has never missed a court date. This man has always shown up, has always been there to talk to his sister. So I sat there with Andy. I said, why do you think that? Oh, because he's not verbal like that. He doesn't talk to me like that. And that's something Black people get scripted onto them a lot, not being emotional, not being verbal, and that being interpreted as not wanting to engage or not caring. And I called that out. I said, that is literal anti-Blackness. What about what he's done makes you think he doesn't want his kids back? Because it wasn't even that they were saying he's doing something wrong. The DHS worker was saying, I don't think he wants his kids back, his children. And that's something that happens all the time. Folks are very, 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 they take things that have no warrants to them and use it as fact. So then they approach this man as though he doesn't want his kids back. And I talked to his attorney and our attorney, and his attorney was like, that's a great point. Thank you for pushing that up. Or thank you for raising that. And now his attorney is more aware of that. And that's just an issue. People aren't nuanced here. They don't take into account, or white attorneys might not always know what this DHS worker is saying is covert forms of anti-Blackness, or this is how it's going to operate. And the last thing I wanted to just talk about is why it's so important to just talk about what brings people to these places is how much time is required of them to do certain things. Like Cindy brought up all these courts and all these dockets. And the thing about them is that they, like, the core idea, it wouldn't take me that long to figure out how it wouldn't be accessible to anyone, right? Like I talked about social services docket. It's not accessible to people who don't have phones. It's not accessible to people who don't have Wi-Fi, who don't have a place to go. They can't call you. They can't do things like check-in. So why would that have been a solution? Calvin Warren said in Black Nihilism that sometimes solutions just create more problems. And I think that is like the basis for what we see when we try to see people reform, or try to reform with a detached lens, or I guess from their view from nowhere, is that they never work and they create more problems later for our clients, for our communities, and honestly for the courts, because now they're stuck with, statistics about how things have not improved here. They're stuck with the reality they created. And so, yeah.
Thank you for that. All of you all. It's a lot. I've been taking notes, just kind of personal reflections and just like what y'all are saying. And so I'm looking forward to hearing some of what the students and those folks who are watching, their questions that they're going to ask. So to everyone who's listening, to the students, I'm going to, by show of hand, when you show the little thing, y'all know how this works. Y'all are technology people. When you put that up, I will allow for you to ask the question. Please state your name and who you're referring that question to, or if that question, I'm seeing people, boom, boom, say less. But to state who that question is to, or if it is to a few people or to all, whatever, but just state your name and not these interesting username things that y'all are putting up. Oh, well.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
My name is Najara, not www.blackness. But I just want to point that out. Go ahead.
So my question is, well, is you kind of touched on it a little bit at the end of what you were saying. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. I apologize. But it was the last person who was speaking. And my question is, have you ever thought of like different solutions that operate outside of the law? For example, never interacting with the state at all.
Y'all can now unmute yourselves because I'm done with this part.
Yes, and we have, that's something, so that presents a problem where we said personally, yes. Personally, my personal day-to-day as well as in my own debate career, absolutely. But I had an incident where we have clients who operate under the, like, there's a multiplicity of things our clients will do and how they'll react to their options. Some refuse the options given to them. They're like, actually, this makes no logical sense. I don't understand how this is legal. And they ask really great follow-up questions to which we literally have to respond with, this is just the way things are, or try to, but there are people who respond with, we don't fuck with the state. We're not going to fuck with the state. And I can, I guess, talk to what that looks like for them. I had a client who was working a DHS case, and this happens quite frequently. She was doing everything. Like, she acknowledged, because part of DHS cases is acknowledging why you brought yourself here in this situation. And so if they don't understand fully to DHS's liking why they got their kids taken away, then usually nothing moves forward. So she got to a place where her kids were returned to her, which is called trial reunification, and that's a big deal. Something happened to where trial reunification was then revoked, and DHS wanted to take her kids back into custody. At that point, she was like, no. Before I acknowledged what was wrong, I acknowledged what I had done wrong. I'm not going to, because you all know me. You all work with me. Why are you all acting like you lack the nuance to understand what's going on? Because no matter how long you worked a case, a DHS worker will still act the same way they would have if they just met you. So what happened is she took her kids and she said no. Like, she said what she said. She is not turning her kids over to DHS custody, had not turned over her kids to DHS custody. And that means a lot of things for the reality of our clients, because we like to say all the time, especially in debate, just say no, just don't engage, or say F the police or F the state. But what that meant for her is living, constantly looking over her shoulder. It meant homeschooling her kids, then having the program that she's utilizing to homeschool her kids call the police on her. So when she did come to school for a meeting, or when she is going to be at the place, there are already mandatorily reporters trying to set her up. So she took her kids out of that program, tried to enroll them in school. Same thing happened. And she's been trying her best to continue to follow the laws and still, not blow up the spot more, for lack of a better phrase, for herself. But you can only do so much. So she came to court recently trying to be like, what can I do? Because I'm not giving my kids back over. I don't trust the foster care system. Terrible things happen to children. And the judge was like, ma'am, I understand and I appreciate you coming. Even a judge who says, I understand. I appreciate you coming. I hear you. And as a parent, like, when clients ask them, as a parent, what would you do in my situation? They never answer. He essentially was like, I still have to do my job. So you have two options. You can either disclose the location of the kids, or you can go into jail until you will, and David L. Moss until you do. She's not in David L. Moss, and they do not have the kids. She figured out a way to leave the courthouse and has been gone since then. But that's really the reality when it comes to, like, solutions, as in just like, don't engage. We can't do that from our office because we know, we can, and if clients, we said at the beginning, we operate on a client-centered model. If our clients say, my goal is to not fuck with the state, we'll say, okay, we cannot aid and abet you in doing anything illegal, but here's how we can safety plan, right? Tell us the numbers we need to call. Tell us, make sure our clients have our cards. Wherever they go, they can call us, reach out to us at any time. Let us know. If they do call us, we let them know. Don't let us know where their kids are. Don't let us know any relevant information, because that would make we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we have to work against you. So we make that very clear. We're very transparent with our clients, what we can do if they decide to break the law, because the truth of the matter is, once you decide you no longer want to engage with the state, you are basically breaking the law if there is any requirement that you must. And so then you are quite literally a fugitive at that point.
All right. So I think Rohith has the next question. Like I said, y'all, if you have a question, give me the blue hand and say who the question is to. Here you go, Rohith.
Hi, I had a question kind of on like, I don't know who said this in particular, but y'all started pointing out the ways in which people kind of address like reform, like as a kind of a blanket action that like the system itself must do, but doesn't really like look at the ways in which there's like libidinal interactions within that between like judges and prosecutors and defendants. So what, like, how do you go about still, you know, helping out your clients when you know that in certain instances it's not even a question of whether or not legal action can be taken, but like the way in which certain judges orient themselves towards like the people you're defending?
It's unmuted, so y'all can, whenever, yeah, y'all can unmute yourselves.
I think, unfortunately, the answer to that question is when we deal with these situations where things are like unnecessarily escalated, like in the example I gave with my client's misdemeanor charge being refiled as a felony. So, you know, what happens in a scenario like that is then, you know, that case goes to a totally different judge on a totally different floor of the courthouse, and we start all over again. Our advocacy resets essentially, and it resets to, you know, adapt to the next phase of the case ultimately. Because I wish there was more we could do. And as far as telling, you know, DAs like, look, no, like advocacy, really like actually affecting the DAs that we try to provide for our clients, but it just doesn't. And I think that something that I've learned in this system is sometimes the sheer powerlessness that you have, even like on a defense team, even with an attorney, right? The state's power is almost always greater than. So what we try to do, at least with our clients, and like we did in that scenario that I discussed, is we go through every single, you know, worst case scenario. And my client knew whenever she chose to fight for her rights that if we lost, they could, not they will, but they could refile this charge as a felony, which will mean the following. So our clients like go into this battle like knowing that you know, these systems are not designed to protect them. They're not designed to help them. They're not designed to make things easier for them. We are going into a literal battle. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think like just strategically, just practically, like when something like that does happen in these interpersonal reactions, just the pure like that, other than just fierce advocacy, like we try to provide with Still She Rises in particular.
Thank you. We've got,
I want to piggyback a little bit off that. Sorry, just really quickly, that we do a lot that Sydney brought up earlier, that what me and we do and the advocates do are very different, given just like that, right? So sometimes I'm in a room and there'll be other service providers or power players there. There might be a worker that I've been talking to really well from the Domestic Violence Center who I know is aligned with us and I know will combat the narrative or that desire, whatever. So I can use that piece to our advantage. And sometimes we get really lucky where we'll have more service providers who see the efforts our clients are doing, who are on the same page on some of the systematic things that we are all on as an organization. And so we can create a unified front to say, actually, no, there's no reason why you all should be doing this, because this person is working these services, this thing can exist, and we can solve this problem without you all doing the things that you're doing. And so that's really honestly the biggest way we can do things. And sometimes it means being respectable. Sometimes it means I have to, in a very covert, nice way, be like, no, what you're just saying, I'm not attacking you, but really what I'm trying to do is just educate you. And like, we each as advocates have found individual ways where we can go into family group conferences or go into court settings and try our best to reach our client's goal, let them leave the room with dignity, and figure out what we can do in the back doors, what we need to do, whether that be you cannot mess up client, or we need to do this thing or prepare for these outcomes, what we can do to combat that in more covert ways, because we, like Sydney says, the state has overwhelming power. So we just need to figure out whatever ways we can to band together. And sometimes that means figuring out who's aligned with you on a specific case and who's not.
Sounds like strategy. Rohit has a follow-up, but Rohit, please keep it concise because we do have people who are putting up the blue hands.
Okay. Yeah. So y'all kind of, what I got from that was that you just have to adapt in certain instances. In terms of like the way it applies in debate, how do you think it would be best to like problematize the notion that reform, if it occurs, and there's always a discussion of like only after that reform occurs, what will happen? Like the whole fiat thing, how do you think that like you can problematize that notion best?
And before I know this is like a debating question, I just wanted to like to put it into not debating moment real quick.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. That's why I'm here, to be a little less debatey, ironically. So fiat, just changing the question of would from should, it allows for affirmatives to not necessarily deal with kind of the processing of passing a bill or passing a plan and like whether or not the plan will pass, but when the plan passes, does it solve for this kind of impact that the affirmatives do solve for kind of high level incarceration rates and like the kind of very moral impact of it all? The debate's not about whether or not that would happen. It's more about the value of assuming a world in which that does take place. So Rohit, there's K debate, there's like a critical side of debate, and there's the more kind of pragmatism of policy debate. And so people who defend fiat are saying that the idea of reform and starting from the kind of when it is done and being kind of oriented towards the benefits of it in relationship to a critical side that's like, well, there are a lot of these kind of interpersonal / kind of foundations that undergird the logic of reform that should be evaluated first. How does that with this topic, right? When the affirmative is like, but like we could just fiat those reforms, good? Or how does that work for the kind of a critical understanding with what y'all are talking about? Sorry, go ahead.
So I think, and like, correct me if I'm just going in a different direction than what the question was geared for, that like, is the question short, like reform, what do we say if people are like, but the reform should happen, like these should just happen, right? Correct, Jasmine?
Yeah, I'm assuming so, yes.
I think that's the part where you bring up all the examples of the worst world in which reform has happened. Like what Aisha said, these things aren't reform. So first of all, what things are you saying are reform, right? Because what we've talked about, what we've told y'all, and what I said at the beginning about how I view office as reform, but that's not something being led by the government or the state. I'm not sure if that actor has the capacity to truly do reform. So I think that you can just bring up the ways in which moves that governments and states are making are they make things net worse. It's not that just things stay the same, but you make the world worse. I think an example, because a lot's happening in the world right now, and we're in Tulsa, it would be silly of us not to mention just like the talks happening with our mayor right now and what's happening to Black people across the country. So Terrence Crutcher was a unarmed Black man who was killed here in Tulsa. His sister, Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, has since then been trying to work with politicians and leaders, trying to reform, trying to get justice for Terrence, because the cop who killed him now teaches courses for cops on how to survive killing a civilian. And so less than a week ago, our mayor was sitting in a room with her talking about all the new ideas they have on policing, how they have this great new startup about how they're going to have psychologists in various areas to assess if someone's having a mental health crisis rather than the police do it. And she stopped. I was thinking as she was talking, like, here we go. Another idea. And it was so refreshing. She stopped the mayor. She was like, stop. Every single task force, every single thing y'all have done here has been an epic fail. Has like not just only, like, and we come back over and over and over again. We are not the ones in the room with you when you make these ideas. They're not going to hire Black psychiatrists. They're not going to hire people who understand that most Black and brown people are always in a constant state of mental health. So you really just need to be nuanced and hold them. Like, debate needs to be shifting toward, just in general, needs to be shifting towards a model where we actually make people answer what the is. What is the thing you're going to do? You don't just get to say, well, we get to do reform. Like, what is reform? Define what that is. Define what that thing you're saying we should do is, and then defend the implications of that action. If we're supposed to garner education from experimenting with this thought project, with this hypothetical, we've given y'all a lot of hypotheticals, and that's exactly what the mayor did. So when you are in a position where you have an ask saying, let's just debate the hypothetical, remember what the people on the ground are saying, what Dr. Tiffany Crutcher said. No, we don't need to engage in these hypotheticals. And even if we did, the hypothetical answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is a question more directed at, I guess, everyone on the panel. Kind of tuning in here, it seems as though a lot of the discussion that we've been having in this group is about the very real, almost sort of incremental type changes that individuals who assume levels of power within the criminal, the criminal legal system, like what sort of incremental changes could they produce within their capacity and collect more kind of power possibilities within their position. But as a lot of debaters are probably painfully aware of, incremental change is often dogged on in debate, mostly because of kind of what Jasmine was just talking about, the concept of fiat focusing on purely the consequences of actions solving particular problems and less what actions can be taken in the face of problems. So my question more directly is, what do you think debaters who are talking about like sort of police abolition or some means along those lines, what do you think those debaters should be considering when discussing exporting or mobilizing their politics outside of debate, understanding that the real world doesn't operate with a sense of fiat and that incremental change in the real world can and does yield what some would consider positive results, if that makes sense.
Take a stab at that from your perspectives.
So I'm not sure I am clear on the question, and I don't want to answer the wrong question. I think so. A couple, but I'm going to try to take a stab. So I don't think that the messaging that we are necessarily saying is that incremental change should be the model. But I think what we understand is that we are talking to you about practically what our structure is, right? If you are asking about how do I engage with, learn about, be more informed about, get involved with that change outside of the debate argument, I think this is the time. It's always been a time, but there's a time and space and like ample opportunity to be engaged around that. I'm not sure that I understand the framing of what you are needing for structuring the argument for debate purposes. But what I would say is that what I think is critical for sort of the preparation of this is to think about both swaths, like think about spaces, research spaces in which there has been what have been the incremental change proposed and executed, and what have been the sort of theories of change that were not incremental, but almost revolutionary, and how to execute both of those, right? Like, there have been both of those in our lifetimes. And so I think that in order to prepare any type of argument within this debate preparation, you need to be looking at both of those things. And then you need to sort of figure out and synthesize what is most effective for debate. Beyond that, if you're asking about, then what do I do? Like, how do I take it to the streets? I mean, I think that's a conversation that is really practically, like, literally literally equip yourself and inform yourself, like, engage with the questions that, like, ask yourself what you don't know, and then where can I learn that? And I think be intentional about doing so.
Yeah. I wanted just to tag to what Squid was saying, I think a bit more, because, like, I have an issue with debate. I got, like, a bone to pick with it, and I might be even part of the problem of it. And that is kind of like the intellectual hubris of it all. And so it's a big argument in debate is, here's this AF. It is a document. I have read it in the 1AC. I have passed a reform. I am operating from the perspective, not me. I have not read an AF high school, but don't hold me. But I have offered this reform that now says, I am defending police, reform. I am solving for We are assuming that the literal activity of speaking this document into existence has done a material thing. Heard you. Thank you so much. Before Aisha has to head out for another meeting because she's a busy woman, so I just wanted to stop before more stuff was said to say thank you.
You didn't need to stop. I just wanted to let you know if you're like, where did she go?
What made you leave? And then I'm like, because you're a busy boss who needs to do other things, and I understand it. So for the people, but yeah, no, it's just. In debate, academic talk, we're in a room, us and the judge, AF gets read, now the person is affirmative, thinks that they are now the staunch, defenders of reform, that they have changed the world via speaking the 1AC into existence. Ned gets up, reads a criticism, and says, no, you haven't. You have merely just introduced a text into the room, and you are defending why this orientation or this understanding of reform is preferable, without really defending why you think that is so. AF gets back up and says, you know what? Our affirmative, the reform that we are passing, is key to movements, and these movements will substantiate change. The relationship to these movements that the affirmative has, if you were to play a logic game of how to reading the affirmative and insert the movements that they have no relationship to, nor have done any reading on, to the change that they are defending is possible and good in response to TLDR, but criticism is probably some kind of critical race scholarship deviant of like anti-Blackness. This is what they're responding to. And so we can get to that abolition. We can get to that kind of embracement of Black life, but the AF is key to these movements. Movements change. And so I think that's what kind of Squid's asking about is how do we unlearn bad habits in debate or check these bad habits in debate that assume that the Speech Act is material, that you have done something, that are these movements that you are then defending as the necessary action of change in an academic space.
So I think that movements come before reform. Like movements are a prerequisite to the idea you created in the first place. If it wasn't for what we did in Tulsa the past week or so, Live PD, which is like basically cops, would not have been canceled. Our mayor 2 months ago said he would never cancel it. And if it was not for the protests in the street and the movements at night, it would not have created a space for the people who can be at home and write the 1ACs, the 1NCs, the policy to then go and have that success in passing it. So I think that movements, so the idea that AFs say, we are a prerequisite, or we are a gateway, or we help funnel through, actually no. What you do is you ordering what was already successful, because like we didn't need anything written for Still She Rises to exist, right? We were created as a project of the Bronx Defenders by Robin Steinberg. She's a rich white woman. We were, created by rich white people. We're funded by George Kaiser, who's an oil tycoon here in Oklahoma. So like the ethical nature in terms of our organization writ large and like nonprofits is still there. But the individual people that folks hired in Still She Rises that all support abolition, that are all about that life, that all understand the systems at play, makes a difference on how what we do actually comes about. So I'll say that. But I do think that reform, I think that in and of it, and I don't know if this gets at what Squid was talking about, but I think that incremental change is necessary and crucial, because it does have a material impact on our clients' lives. It does make a difference, because like I said, this isn't a choice for most people. You either are going to get your kids back or you're not, which means that for both the negative and the affirmative, it creates a real incentive to make plans and have debates that solve for something, because people are being affected. They're not statistics. They're here. I work with them. I see their faces, and these conversations have a real impact on them. So you can put whatever side you want to develop this argument on, a real big incentive to have discussions that will focus on creating changes for the people affected by these systems, because it can happen, and it can happen in ways that might be counterproductive to dismantling or burning down the state as a whole. Because I want to give a brief example. We had a client who, and this is a client me and Sydney both case we both worked on. And I said earlier, usually our cases tend to run from 6 months to a year. Our clients' kids will be out of their home. This woman, she aged out of foster care to begin with. So she aged out of DHS under their supervision. For 2 years, technically, she was out of the system before getting a case of her own. She walked into our office, 15 weeks pregnant, already with a child. Her partner was forcing her to take drugs, was abusing her, basically held her hostage for several months, to where she hadn't even been outside, really. She had no family in the area because she's not from Oklahoma. The only family that she had was her brother, who she left her child with when she was being abused. And DHS said that was the wrong move because her brother had a criminal history. So she also got charged with leaving her kid with an improper caregiver. Mm-hmm. This woman came into our office, sat down, said, "This is my situation. Here's what I can do." For a case this bad, I would have definitely put it as a high needs case with a very poor outcome. We took her to Divis that day, which, again, all services providers here are usually the feds, and there's disads to going and doing a variety of things. But we took her to that place, a safe location where she was for basically a year. She got her child back in 3 months. Because of the holistic work we were able to do, the communication we were able to have with her attorney, how we were able to be on the same wavelength. The attorney was pushing for things in court with the DA while we were doing work, constantly talking with her DHS worker, constantly talking with Divis, constantly trying to create this narrative, paint this picture. We're reducing the risks, give the kid home. The kid was returned home in 3 months, y'all. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's fucking amazing. She gave birth to her child, and usually whenever you're pregnant and you already have a child in custody, that's an automatic red flag that child, your new baby, will be taken from you at birth in the hospital, which I had a client last week whose 5-day-old was taken from her. This happens a lot. Newborns are literally ripped out of their mother's hands. Her baby stayed in custody. Like, her baby never left her custody. It was born in to her arms at Divis. She was able to take the child home, and now her case is closed. Her case closed out in less than a year, I think, maybe a little bit over a year. I think it was less than a year. Less than a year. And it was a big, big deal for at least me, because it set the threshold for me. I now know that I can get my clients' kids back in 3 months. That's going to be my new goal. right? And so whenever we talk about these things, yes, the situation seems pretty damning, and yes, the state has a lot of power, but there are ways we can move within the system. There are ways we can mitigate. There are ways we can create spaces of care. There are ways we can create change. And 3 months is definitely different than 6. So at the very least, right, there are differences in the levels of violence people face.
I appreciate that. We have 2 questions left. Yeah, y'all. Some really very critical thoughts are happening, and I'm hoping that those who are watching via the stream and then those who are just part of the Zoom are picking up the wisdom, insight of what's being dropped, because it's very important. I have some last thoughts at the end of this in terms of the people who are watching. I got a big ampersand ad, but that's just me. Ronick, go ahead.
So when y'all were discussing like about the specific examples, a lot of you guys made the clarification of, at least in Oklahoma, which seems to imply a disconnect between federal and state criminal legal systems. What are examples of this disjunct, and what is the implication of the legal tactics that you all use? And secondly, what is the impact about this disconnect between federal laws and state implementation?
Okay, so you are asking about federal court in particular? Like, right. You want to specifically know, like, what's the difference between state and federal?
Or the difference between the implications of federal laws on state criminal systems.
So, because neither of us work in federal court, it would be pretty much impossible for us to give you much distinction. However, I do have my partner sitting over there who works as a court interpreter in federal court. And I get a little bit of like feedback. Obviously, I can't give you this as like a reflection of like what the system is like overall. But because he is a Spanish language interpreter, he is working on cases where pretty much most likely the person is from either Central America or Mexico, and it will most definitely get deported because they get federal charges such as illegal reentry or drug conspiracy cases. Obviously, I don't think that's the bulk of what's coming through federal court, but this is just like personal insight that I have, not at all professional, not at all experiential, just basically by word of mouth. And a lot of the negotiation that's going on in that courtroom is to do with basically the defense attorneys are all kind of friends with the DAs there. And the defense attorneys are just trying to get lesser sentences for the people who are most definitely going to federal prison. The negotiation is not so much less of like, hey, could we please like put this person in this program instead? Could we do some kind of sentencing advocacy for this person? Whenever we're talking about like a state court, such as the ones that we work in, the federal court, it's different insofar as I can tell. It's severity as well as like the implication of going to federal prison, I would say. I mean, I don't even know if what I'm saying is that accurate or true. This is just the comparative basis I have. But I think whenever we talk about Oklahoma in particular, we aren't saying, you know, like, Oklahoma is unique. That's what we're saying. Oklahoma is unique from other states. I wouldn't so much pitch it in your head state versus federal court as much as Oklahoma states and Oklahoma statutes versus other states. And for me in particular, whenever I think about Oklahoma in particular, the ways that we function, the ways in which the police department functions, the way in which this law system functions, when we are talking about Oklahoma, we are talking about the statehood in general. We are talking about its particular history and the way the police have functioned, right? Oklahoma is one of the newest states within the United States. Obviously, there has been a settler colonial agenda here. This is originally Indian territory. This was destined to become the state of Sequoia, which would have been essentially what is a dumping ground for Indigenous people and Black people. None of the 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma consented to Oklahoma being a state. There was the Dawes Act, there's been the Curtis Act, all of these different acts within the state of Oklahoma in particular that work to color the actions of the police, that work to color the actions of the court, right? So when I say Oklahoma, I, again, like I say, don't create like a dichotomy in your mind between like, oh, it's a state versus federal. This is like a state by state issue. And I think what contextualizes a lot for me, like I said in the beginning, like I am a Native person on my native land in Tulsa, in Oklahoma, in the state that was a settler colonial project that was never meant to become a part of the United States. That's what I'm saying whenever we're talking about in Oklahoma. Like there is a particular flavor of colonialism. There is a particular flavor of anti-Blackness that is happening in this state. And that is why we specify, like in Oklahoma, this is what we do. Other states, obviously, we understand like they have their own state level organization as to their policing practice, as to the culture, like Aisha was referring to within the court system. But there is something, what I would identify as being very, very pernicious, very specific to what's going on in Oklahoma. I hope that helps answer your question.
I think that I was going to say the same thing too. Going to conferences and talking with folks, you realize that it is just as bad in states that I would think were more liberal, like Washington. I was hearing very like horror stories coming out of there. In other states like Tennessee, people from there were saying how terrible their experiences are there. In Louisiana, there are things that couldn't, that we just don't deal with here. And so every single state is dealing with their own institutions, and it's all bad. But I think, like the city said, we don't work in federal courts, but something we can speak to that COVID gave us some insight to was federal policies and how they impact the day-to-day lives and like how they actually manifest. So we were one of the last states to institute any type of precautions in the pandemic. Our governor was like, no, we're not shutting down shit. We're not shutting down anything. And made, instead of a stay-at-home order, a safer at-home order, and a bunch of other things. However, weeks before, I think it was 3 weeks before, DHS had created a policy. Maybe I'm exaggerating the timeline. But anyways, before our governor had actually instituted any type of statewide mandates, DHS canceled in-person visitation for families. So they were saying you could only see your kids now, either speak to them over the phone or through video call. They didn't give people phones. They didn't ensure that parents had data or Wi-Fi or the capability to see their child. They also didn't care if you had a newborn, and you can't have a conversation with a newborn. You can't have a FaceTime call with a 3-year-old, right? So it takes away family time, which is a right in DHS policy. Visitation is a right. They cannot take that away from you. So we had a motions hearing for one particular client, so she can get her rights back, because she was supposed to be having unsupervised visits at the time COVID took place, meaning she can get her kids whenever. She doesn't need a supervisor. She can just be with her kids and have visits as long as it's agreed upon by the foster parents. That was not happening prior to COVID. And that did not happen prior to COVID. And once COVID happened, they canceled her visitation. During the hearing, we hear DHS had their attorney there. We heard a bunch of arguments from the state saying how we were putting workers at jeopardy, how they didn't know if parents were exposed or not, or taking precautions themselves, et cetera, how it's all we need to do all these things. And keep in mind, these are the same players or people who politically agree with and align themselves with our governor, who honestly, probably personally, were still going out. And our attorneys asked the question, are you saying the foster parents don't go to the gas station? Are you saying they don't go to the grocery store? Are you saying they're not? Are you saying these kids now exist in a vacuum, or no? Because the risk that this argument doesn't make sense. And another attorney for the parent made this one argument that I thought was really telling, which was DHS isn't following policy. You're leading it. Our own governor, you cannot sit here and say, utilize the national conversation about the pandemic when statewide we are not instituting the things you're saying you're following. Our governor didn't say this was a big deal. They didn't even feel the need to restrict these things, and you all had no jurisdiction or ability to take away people's rights. Ultimately, even though all of these arguments went unanswered, the judge decided to uphold the decision to take away parents' rights to visit, citing this Bureau for Children Affairs, which stated that literally that any policy should be nuanced and not a blanket policy. However, they still decided to do that. So that's just one example, I think, and the best example we might be able to give you on the disconnect between either just the way policy making is made nationally, how it's implemented in terms of state governance, and then how it's actually implemented by the institutions, by the government institutions on the ground.
Thank you. Last question, and then maybe some closing thoughts from y'all, if you have them, for these students. Is Veronica?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Veronica, and I've had my question is, like, how has the recent nationwide protests and events that's been going on, has it created any change in your legal systems, or have you seen any change yet? And like, yeah, I just want to hear if there's been any change because of events.
I would say that instead of that, it's like amplified opposition. We're trying, is short answer, especially like me and Brittany, we're trying. But no, I'm actually seeing just like worse and worse shit, at least in Tulsa. Like almost every day, something else kind of shows itself. Like it's not been a very like uplifting kind of like, oh, we're like making change here. No, like no is the short answer.
It's we like to go back to, and I think that there's something in debate we like to talk about fancier issues or fancier places, but I think there's something really about talking about Oklahoma and really focusing on the places where a lot of violence happens, because we are very high in terms of drug use, very high in terms of police brutality, and like Sydney said, we are on indigenous land right now. There are people, right? I mean, the violence that happened, the massacre happened in Tulsa, of Black Wall Street, the burning down, and so you have intergenerational trauma. You have people who don't want to, not that they don't want to speak out or they have the capability to speak out, but just don't, because we don't actually know what's going to come of it, because we know that reform means nothing and it makes things worse. And we know what happens when Black people and brown people are just living their lives, what white rollback and white lash out looks like, and how you can go to the Greenwood Cultural Center here and stand in a room and see pictures of survivors who say, I never saw my father again, I never saw my sister again after that day, and see their faces. There is a history of violence here. So when we talk about what we found is like a lot of peaceful protests and a lot of peaceful reactions, and we just need to say Black Lives Matter and be performative, but we're not seeing the things that actually need to, I mean, if anywhere in America has the grounds to push for the changes we're seeing being pushed nationally, it's a place like Tulsa. It's a place like Oklahoma, because marginalized people here are owed. It's not that we just deserve it. We are owed. And I mean, to give examples today, a major for TPD said, actually, like I shared it on my personal Facebook page. I can link it to Jasmine so she can give it to you all, but said that actually we don't kill that many African Americans as we should. According to him, they should be killing about 24% more African Americans in this region and shooting 24% more than what they do. Our mayor went on national television, not yesterday morning, but the day before yesterday, saying Terrence Crutcher's shooting was not racially motivated, but instead had to do with the drugs in his system that prevented him from complying. Terrence Crutcher called the police to help him with his broken down vehicle on the side of the road. And again, less than a week ago, that same mayor was sitting in a room with his sister pretending he was racially conscious. We are seeing wild things over and over again, contradictory things, given we are in a red state. We are in a red state that believes in gun control to its core. In fact, you can just be 21, walk into a gun store, you don't need a permit, and you can leave with a gun. We are an open carry permitless state. Yet, when they see Black people arming themselves, when we try to say we need to stand our ground, the idea is no, we shouldn't be doing that. So we live in a very weird place. We live in a place that's ripe for change. We've not seen that yet. And I honestly think that once our courts open back up, because we're still working remotely here, that we're going to see a lot more of, we're going to see higher eviction rates because our state has been still filing evictions quietly. I think we're going to see more kids being picked up because of the lack of school, the lack of access to food. I mean, COVID is really changing a lot for our clients, and these protests, I think, unless we can create more meaningful conversations here, will be more damning to our clients. Because white people will think that they did something here. They're going to pat themselves on the back and say, oh, I came to, now I'm woke. And so let me go back into my DHS job. Let me go back into my job as a doctor with this understanding I've done something and still be biased.
Right. Part one, because I should definitely, unless if y'all are consenting to the part 2 date, I would very much so appreciate y'all's insight again for our new group of kids, but also just like furthering the conversation, because this is systematic, it's ongoing, it's historical, in terms of just like the legacy of both settler colonial, anti-Black violence. We see it on a libidinal, political level, and we're here to kind of deal with it. And so I just want to say thank you so much. I wish Aisha was still here for me to kind of continue that thank you, because it means a lot for those who are either, who are in the chat, the students, and then also for those who are watching the live stream. Hopefully y'all don't see me become emotional. It's like, ew, I just care so darn much. But I think that these kind of opportunities to speak with people who are in the topic that we so kind of easily discuss and have debates about at the level of just kind of what's flashed to you, or emailed to you in debate chains, it becomes so easy to have conversations of criminal justice reform. And then this is definitely an to institutions who are having debate camps this summer, who I've seen the lineup, who I've seen who they're bringing to speak. And even if they're not bringing someone to speak, what they as an institution represent. And kind of the last part of what Brittany just said, in terms of you can be the doctor, the politician, just the random person who all of a sudden decided to be a performative ally because, it's kind of bad to be the one who's like, no, let's not do anything. Like, no, I'm going to get cans thrown at me. So I'm just going to join the right side and be like, Black Lives Matter. That institutions need to be held accountable representationally for the environment they provide for their students, educationally, the information that they are providing, and just kind of the actual promises and statements that they're making beyond their kids, their students, their staff, and things like that. And so I just want y'all to kind of understand the importance of moments like this, to one, take some time from people who do not have not busy schedules, and not just kind of from like a physical material level, labor level, but I could only imagine the emotional labor that this all takes, as well as being very active in your communities now. I know that even after this conversation, y'all are heading out to speak further, because people are still dying, and not dying, being killed by the state and by people who have the authority of the state to kill. And so thank y'all. And I hope that y'all who are watching this share that sentiment of thanks. And that
I'll talk to the debaters real quick. Jasmine wrote one time before we leave.
Go ahead.
As a debater, both a Lincoln Douglas debater in high school, and Sydney did debate as well too. We never talked about that, but we both did debate on an Oklahoma level, and then I debated for OU, who left debate and is now doing this work, especially given what's happening now. I really want to encourage you all to take this topic seriously, whether you win or lose, whether you're critical or policy, whoever's watching this, because for me, for like Caitlin, for Jasmine, I don't know if even Caitlin really think, but we've spent quite some time discussing what's happening right now in the world, theorizing, debating, folks, policy asks, critical asks, talking about queerness, negatives of all types, picking our brains, hearing critiques, hearing criticisms. And I'm realizing a lot of what I was doing, I didn't tell my community. And they need that information. They should know that there are people, whether they are critical or policymakers, who've written about what they've done. We talk about in debate all the time, let's not reinvent the wheel. A lot of people in the comments are reinventing the wheel, regardless of where you see yourself right now. People are affected by this. They matter, and they should be discussed. They should be disseminated. They should be well thought. They should be nuanced. Whatever, again, side of debate you find yourselves on, please take this seriously. Take your voice seriously. Take the labor you're doing seriously, because we need to find answers, right? It's not an intellectual game. Or there's still going to be people fighting in California. There's still going to be people here, me and Sydney. That's why our voices are gone. We were out last night doing stuff. So we need answers, whether that be a decent policy that could solve something or some critical stuff, some literature we haven't found. We really do. And the work y'all are doing is important. So please take that seriously.
I guess I'll just say as like a final wrapping up thing, Jasmine, is that cool with you? Are we wrapping up?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I was a debater in high school. I debated on the regional and state level, but I didn't bring it to college with me, and I got pretty much immediately involved in direct actions. And I guess something that I would say to those of you that I know come from genuinely a place of privilege and your ability to talk the way you can, to like have the resources that you do, to have the knowledge that you do, to have the bodies that you do, to have the voices that you do, that really consider the community that you're in. And I think that something like, as an Indigenous person, that's always been important to me. I've never left Oklahoma in my whole life. This is my family's land. This is where my ancestors were marched to forcibly on the Trail of Tears. My investment is in my surroundings. And so I implore you to take everything that Brittany just said, but really think critically about the way you're locally engaging with people, right? Like, do you know the local organizations in your area? Do you know the local nonprofits? Do you know any of the Indigenous people that are Indigenous to the land around you? Do you know the local Black coalitions? All of those things, I think, as you're debating, as you're going to these tournaments, you're going to these rounds, keep those in mind. Have make a good faith effort if you can, to support those around you, to offer skills that you might have. If you have the ability to like just type up some literature to like print out on flyers to hand out at protests, like that's meaningful. That's something that that you could contribute. And I don't know anyone here, so you probably already have, maybe, I don't know, but it's just something I wanted to say after like the end of this discussion, and like knowing my background as a debater and knowing my background is my decision to not engage in collegiate level debate, which isn't at all like a knock on the activity. Obviously, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was worthwhile. I think it's incredibly worthwhile. And I also think that simultaneously there are ways that you can take this to a praxis level. And I don't want to see what I've seen with some people who have really wasted potential, is to theorize your way out of doing things in the community that you're in, regardless if this is the one that you're from, even if you're just passing through the area. It's worthwhile to engage on an intellectual level, and it's just on a level of praxis and, affecting things around you. And as we all know, like, now is the time. I mean, if there was never before, like, now is the time. So I really appreciate you guys listening to us and listening to all the weird, horror, and shitty stories that we have about the various systems in Tulsa. But like Brittany said, these are real things. These are real people. We know them. We see them. And like, shouts out to everyone that is involved in this like crazy struggle. But yeah.
With that being said, I'm not going to keep y'all too much longer, i.e. saying goodbye now. And to my students who are part of Debate Critique, I will see you all tomorrow. Please bring your thoughts and your reflections. You're like, Jasmine, you give us homework for days. I do. But this is homework that you should not see as obligation. this should be like the critical work that you are doing with this topic. So please bring back your thoughts, how this is going to inform the arguments that you are going to write. Do what Sydney just said, is to know the communities that you're in. It just looks, especially you're in digital debate, you're not going to tournaments. You're going to be arguing about criminal justice reform, criminal legal reform from your bedroom. I mean, I don't know if I had a big TLDR of whether or not debate will be digital completely, but like, let's be just like a realistic. It's get to know the communities that you are in. You're not going to sound too genuine, even if you're the K person, because we know a lot of critical people who are like, I know all the theories of the world and how it structures stuff. But then they don't, when they go outside, their communities don't know them, or the people who they're speaking to don't know them. So you have some type of fetish. I'm sorry, I said it. Some type of, personal attachment to competition, where you don't really want to do the things that you're saying, which probably points to the disconnect between fiat and like actual conversation, and not just fiat on the debate level. Just like y'all are excellent talkers, think about what you're saying. And that's the policy side to the critical side. Your scholarship takes work. Challenge yourself. Get to know your communities. There are a lot of people who you'll be talking about who won't be able to speak for themselves, partially because either they are not given the access to, or sadly because they are not here anymore, right? And so if you are not doing the work, do not say the names. And I'm sorry, that's just something else that I know is going to be a big thing. This topic is like, there are a list of names of all these people who have been brutally. You don't know those names, and you don't do the work for the people who are not on that list, who are in your communities every day. So I really resonate with that last statement that Sydney has for y'all, and that is get to know where you are at. Because honestly, when you try to create these dichotomies between we're the critical people who care so much and those policy people just aren't about that, what are you about? Really, what are you about? And so that's not, me be like, oh, don't read the critique anymore. Oh, just leave debate if I can't be authentic and real. It's hold yourself accountable and kind of recognize when you're saying things that really aren't connected, or you're saying things about something that is it's intimate, and there's going to be people who have personal problems about some ways that you discuss things, especially if you were to take this out and say it in front of somebody and it's clear that you're not engaging. And I know I said I was going to say goodbye. This is my goodbye. It's just, my long-winded goodbye. But thank y'all so much. Please let this is on YouTube. It's going to be accessible. And so if you can share it to folks who are debating, who are not debating, I think the information and conversation that was provided by the panelists from Still She Rises was valuable and a resource that should be to everyone. So yeah,